It's 7:38 a.m. and my snoozed alarm is about to go off for the fourth time. My phone has already informed me of multiple bombings in Ukraine, killing citizens in their apartments where their children slept. Pillows are all over the floor, as well as blankets that I threw off in the middle of the night. I roll out of bed and walk to the living room. The coffee table is covered in evidence from my late night, midnight snack of popcorn and gummy worms. Unable to sleep the night before, I just snacked. Rose's leash is on the workbench, compelling me to take my 50-pound baby outside so she can relieve herself. At that moment, CNN notifications pop up with news that a pregnant woman in Texas is protesting her ticket for driving alone in the HOV lane. My favorite line from an op-ed piece on it said, "It seems Texas' strict anti-abortion law, which defines an unborn child as an individual living member of the Homo sapiens species, only applies when it's being used against women, not when it can help them get out of a traffic ticket." Facebook notifications also tell me that over 100 homes in Virginia were swept off their foundations during an overnight storm. Rose is looking at me, telling me that she's ready to go inside for her breakfast. And then I see that CBS announces that their former prime minister was shot with a homemade gun. It was the first time a serving former or current serving politician has been killed in post-war Japan. And my thoughts spiral to how US gun activists are going to use this to bolster their arguments for allowing civilians access to military-grade weaponry. I stare at the dishes in the sink. Then the dishwasher, knowing that there are dishes in there that are clean, that I need to take out and put away, then wash the dishes and put them in there. Then I read that the World Economic Forum revealed that gender equity, which is defined by 4 factors, salary/economic opportunity, education, health, and political empowerment. This gap remains, and it's going to be 135.6 years before gender equity is planned to be seen in our world. When ranking the 156 countries in the report, the US ranks 30th. This was released in March, though, and does not include the newest attack on childbearing folks. Towers of half-folded laundry also surround me. Scattered debris from Rose's recent rampage of toys litter the floor. So I collapse on the couch, burrito myself into a blanket, and stare at the ceiling in despair. The scenes of burnout at its finest. I'm always grateful for the lectionary. For one thing, I hate making choices. I hate making decisions. So give me a few options, and I can narrow that down pretty easily. But for another, the lectionary provides passages that I wouldn't even think about working with, and today is one of those days. Amos is an amazing prophetic book for those who are thirsting for justice in an unjust world. Public theologians have a special affinity for Amos, from activists like Martin Luther King Jr., who made Amos 5:24, "Let justice roll down like waters," one of his reform verses, to Sheila Katz, who is the head of the National Council of Jewish Women, who at a Poor People's Rally in DC proclaimed, "We gather on these streets in the spirit of the prophet Amos, who declared, 'Hate evil, love good, and establish justice in the public square.'" But just who is Amos, and what does he have to do with justice? So during the reign of King Jeroboam II, around 786 to 746 BCE, Israel was a 2-kingdom nation. At first, the king followed the practices of his predecessors and ruled the northern kingdom as an iron fist over the southern kingdom. Yet he slowly saw the value in restoring some sort of relationship with the southern kingdom. So he gave them back some land that he took and tried to rebuild previously burned bridges. As good political situation ended up happening between the 2 kingdoms, came prosperity for the nations. For some, prosperity for some. Many people in the northern kingdom became very wealthy and began to lead very luxurious lives. And perhaps unsurprisingly to us, the unusual prosperity brought a collapse of what we see as moral standards. Ignored were the great ideals and the commandments of the Torah to help the poor, practice justice, and love kindness. The rich oppressed the poor, might was right. It was an age of corruption. Thus sets the stage for our typical shepherd turned prophet, Amos. He especially, through verses like we read earlier, exposed the inner thoughts of the wealthy elites, and by doing so revealed the devastating contempt that they had for the poor, for the land, and for their God. The disdain they held for the Sabbath days and festivals were days in which they and their workers were supposed to rest. So they didn't like having festival days because their workers were no longer turning a profit for them. Their eagerness to move past these days had nothing to do with justice, like we hear in Micah 6, when they're called to set aside festival days because the Lord saw them as unjust. But rather, for here in our time, they were having days of exploitation, cheating their business partners, impoverishing everyone who worked with them, taking advantage of the poor, all the while riding rocket ships up to space for 5 minutes. Oh, wait, sorry, that's the wrong timeline. We proclaim, and rightly so, that God remembers us in our suffering and is with us in our struggles. Whether these are everyday difficulties or the greatest depths of grief and rage and sorrow. But here's the thing that we don't talk about enough, and Amos is here to tell us: God is also with us when we cause suffering. That God sees, hears, remembers, and judges. Cameron B.R. Howard, who's an associate professor of Old Testament at Luther Seminary, said it best when they said, we see this very reality in Jesus, actually. Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus, the hero to the outcast, downtrodden, the Prince of Peace, whose crucified body is a stark reminder of human capabilities for injustice and cruelty. The resurrected Jesus is also a tortured and executed God with us, she goes on to say. If we have God with us whenever we need God, we also have God with us whenever we are defying God. Or in the words of Joan Osborne, who said it best with, what if God was one of us? Just a slob like one of us, just a stranger on a bus trying to make his way home. I sit with that, thinking about, when do I see God in my day, in my week? Where do I see God enacted in the world around me? And more often than not, it is absolutely in the face of the other. And whatever struggles that they are encountering and bearing and trying to overcome, there I see God. God as one of us, present in our anguish and in our humanness. Also, just a stranger on a bus who was burnt out and trying to make their heavenly kingdom on this earth. Despite our best intentions, sometimes we just don't meet God there. So the good news is God is with us. The bad news, unlike the fairy tales and pining of every generation, God, it seems, doesn't make the bad things go away, doesn't make them disappear. In fact, it seems that God has a long history of being the one who exposes the bad things and empowers whoever is willing to listen to do something about it. Be they a shepherd, fisherman, cloth trader, or a 13-year-old wearing a bisexual flag from Florida who was arrested last week at a peaceful protest during the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But I am preaching to the choir, UBC. Y'all know this truth. This community's history is rich in Amos-like prophetic work. You know that we are called to advocate for just treatment of all people. You see the injustice of a rigged economy. You testify on behalf of trans students, refugees, abortion, health care, and radical racial reform. So today, I just want to remind you that this work is the work of a lifetime, 1,000 lifetimes. Justice is an endless target that transforms with every generation. Justice is not a race to sprint nor a maze to win. Rather, it's a labyrinth that we walk over and over, winding in and out, practicing hospitality to the stranger and compassion to the marginalized. Each generation has a different person in mind when we say those words, and our task is to continue to find them and work on their behalf and alongside. Justice work is exhausting. Pursuing justice can burn you out faster than a gasoline-soaked match. The thirst for transformation is addictive. It burns bright in our souls and ignites our bodies to action, but without mindful practice and intentional care, it can burn out just as quickly. In their book, Burnout, The Secret of Unlocking the Stress Cycle, authors and sisters Emily Nagosa, PhD, and Amelia Nagoska, DMA, break down how our bodies and minds are affected by stress. They say, think about it, what stress does to just one part of our system, the cardiovascular system. Being chronically stress-induced and living in that tension means chronically increased blood pressure, which is like constantly running a fire hose on your blood vessels when those vessels were designed by evolution to only handle a gentle flowing stream. The increased wear and tear on your body leads to increased risk for heart disease when your blood vessels are so affected by stress. And this happens, remember, in every organ system in your body: digestion, immune functioning, hormones. We're not built to live in constantly engaged stress state. This is the upside down world we live in. Most situations, they say, in the modern post-industrial West, the stress will kill you faster than the stressor will. Stress. Living in constantly engaged anxiety, watching the injustice in our world, wondering what is the point, wondering what we can change, sitting in that will kill you faster than the stressor itself. There's a couple of things they mention in their book that I want to highlight for us that I think are important as we sit in this tension of being justice seekers and activists who are also in this long labyrinth marathon of work ahead. They say our culture gives us a lot of ways to describe what it feels like when your brain chooses the go stress response. Words such as irritated, annoyed, frustrated, anger, irate, or engaged are used when you're in your fight mode. When you're in your flight mode, words are used such as unsure, worried, anxious, scared, frightened, terrified. But what are the words that describe the emotion of freeze? When you're so burnt out, you can't move. These are the words that are like shut down, numb, immobilized, disconnected, petrified. You may feel disengaged from the world, sluggish, like you don't care or nothing matters. You feel outside of all of the issues and things you're feeling in your body. They said if we don't have a good word to describe the experience of freeze, we don't really have a good word to describe what next. So they paint a little picture for us when they say, imagine a gazelle is running and a lion is chasing after it. The gazelle is in the middle of their flight. They're fleeing for safety. But what happens when the lion catches the gazelle? Clamps down on its hind end and paralyzes it. Typically, the lioness will go and find the family and bring them to the animal. And they say that this is when a gazelle freezes in a response. And once that lion is gone, all the adrenaline built up in the gazelle's bloodstream gets purged in a process the same way running to safety purges chemicals. They also go on to say that it's like a woman who ended up hitting a cat, And she was so worried about the cat, she like ran out of her car and was checking on it, and the cat was just still, and she thought it was over. And then all of a sudden, the cat just jumped to life and sprinted off. I'm sure some of us have experienced something to that effect before. When we have these experiences, it's the break coming off of that freeze moment in our bodies. And our actual bodies are starting to wake up. Muscles can begin to shake and quiver. Our hearts will pound even faster. We have that adrenaline that has been said to help people lift cars off of others, coursing through us. And when the freeze lifts, that's the time for you able to go. But what happens when the freeze lifts and you don't move? You don't release the stress that is coursing through you, trying to wake you up. If you're so burnt out that you are disconnected, but your body is still holding on to all of these stressors, it leads to long-term issues, long-term care concerns for your physical and mental health. They go on to say that you have to do the work of breaking the stress cycle. When you acknowledge what it is that sets you off, another hearing from the Supreme Court, another form of frustration, walking out and noticing that your car's tire is flat. And on any other given day, it might have been fine, but today of all days, when you have meetings and errands and children, and your body holds on to all of this, and you have to break the stress cycle. They go on to say that the best way to do that is actually through exercise. So hold on, before you all make the faces at me that I know you should make. They have a really great story with this, too, that I want to share. Emily was speaking at an event where she was sharing about how you break the cycles of stress. And in it, she said, exercise is the #1 way to be able to break stress. And when this happened, a young woman named Sophia walked up to Emily afterwards. And she said, listen, I will not exercise. She went on to describe how as a child she was very tall. She's an African-American woman, about 6'1". In high school, everyone assumed that she played sports. And she just went on to say, I detest sweating. I don't want to sweat. I don't want to run out of my breath. I don't want to deal with the discomforts of exercise. I will not do it. And so Emily ended up coming back to her and said, okay, I have an exercise for you. She said, start by laying in bed. Sophia immediately said, oh, my favorite exercise. Emily went on to say, progressively tense and release every muscle in your body, starting with your feet and ending with your face. Tense them hard, 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 and then slowly release your muscles through the count of 10. Make sure you spend extra time tensing the places where you carry the stress most. Like for me, my shoulders, constantly tense. So I've been practicing holding them. And then once I get into a space where I can feel my muscles engaged, I slowly count to 10 and release. Emily went on to say, the most important thing that you have to do is visualize. Really clearly visualize what it feels like to beat the living daylights out of whatever stressors you've encountered. Imagine it really clearly. You should notice your body responding, like your heart beating faster, your fists clenching until you reach a satisfying sense of victory. As you do this, they go on to warn, your body will begin to physically shake and react. In breathing and through the count of 10, you're awakening your muscles to shake out the built-up chemicals that have been sitting in harbor from the stress that you carry. So today, I just wanted to encourage you all to hear that we are in a space needing to break our cycles of stress. We experience the word and the world that we live in. We know what is in front of us. We know the journey and the tasks. And so with the exercises and imaginations that they have given us to do, I want to give us 2 more. Sometimes as a prayer practice and engaging my holy imagination, I picture having a conversation with God where they are wearing punching mitts and are egging me on to keep moving and hitting their mitts, almost like sparring and boxing. Every breaking news announcement is slammed into those mitts as my muscles release the anger and pain. I imagine shifting on my feet, pulling my arms in and out. I tighten my fist, feel the muscles pull and engage, and just about when all of that energy is about to burst, I imagine just hitting into that punching mitt with God holding them over and again, enticing me and begging me and compelling me to keep going, releasing that stress that is about to make me burst. God is not scared of my anger in these moments. God is not chiding me for not being tranquil, meek, or mild enough. They again invite me to swing again and again, giving me permission to let it all go, all the things I can't change, all the frustration at humans choosing to hurt others, all the feelings of helplessness and powerlessness, all the tears I can't shed. My godly sparring partner accepts all of it, feels every hit and knows every bit of my rage. And then I go and I sit in that space, knowing that that is the same God who met Amos and called out the injustice that is going on in their world. The rich taking advantage of the poor, holy days being tossed aside for exploited workers, knowing that God feels that same anger at the injustice that I see. Another practice that I do is throwing ice cubes, and some of you may have heard me say this before. I take a whole container of ice cubes and I'll go out to a sidewalk, typically ends up being my parking garage area. And with every ice cube I hold, I pray that whatever is eating away at me that I can't change is embodied in this. And then I just throw it into the ground and watch it shatter. It melts away. It's not a problem. You don't leave debris. But I am able to physically release the stress and anxiety that is holding on to my heart, getting it out, knowing that if I can release this and break the stress cycle, that I can continue in the work of justice that's in front of me. Beloveds, I encourage you to find whatever practice works for you and to put it to use. We are people who strive to live the ideals of Psalm 15, as read by, we want to live into the ideals of Psalm 15, but we live in an Amos world. It's imperative that we find ways like Mary, who rested at Jesus' feet, to find places where we can restore ourselves so that we can continue to do the work like Martha, who served. We need to do this so that, unlike Martha, we don't become bitter to those who do rest, finding ways that we can continue to restore ourselves. I am overjoyed to be in this work with you, UBC. I pray that we hold fast to what is good. I hope we gather together like we did last night at Lisa's and Kai's so that we can lift one another's spirits up, playing games, sharing stories, and laughter. This is a way that we can practice breaking the stress cycle and holding on to one another so that we can do kingdom work for decades to come. I hope we trust in the knowing that God is with us and God goes before us. It is our task to sustain our hearts and use our hands for the work that is in front of us. And perhaps in doing so, we can see the kingdom of God break upon this earth day after day, and know that we can sustain ourselves for the labyrinth work ahead of us, allowing us to wind in and out, right alongside one another and right alongside our God. Amen.